newsletter is about to come out. It's at the printers and it's coming out soon. I urge you to, if you're not signed up for that, make sure you get signed up for it. We are asking, again, and I think I've made this appeal before, we are asking people to please meet your annual dues obligation. It's $50 a year now. The cost of doing this kind of stuff is not going down. The Biden recovery is hitting us pretty hard. So if you haven't paid your dues yet, please do so. The newsletter, by the way, it goes out to everybody who's on our mailing list, and it always has an envelope that you can use to pay the dues. So, and also gives us, there's also a space in the envelope or on the card in the envelope. There's a place where you can help us identify potential new members and particularly new organizations that we might reach out to help publicize these luncheons. So please be diligent about getting that. We also have new videos posted for our luncheons in March and April. I don't know how many of you have gone to Catholic Citizens TV, but it's becoming an incredibly robust site. It's getting a lot of attention. We always have great speakers. The most recent postings, I believe, include Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, who's become somewhat of a controversial figure. He did not call for the Pope's resignation at our luncheon, but he has done so since. But anyway, it's still a fabulous talk. And what I was struck all over again by these talks, these are not loosey-goosey chats. These speakers come in from all over the country and give extremely organized and thought-out talks. And that was certainly true with Dr. Kwasniewski. So if you're not able to get to these luncheons in person, which is always the best way to do it, you can always look at the videos down the road when we post them. So we got a couple more up. And then last, we did announce this previously, and it's going to be there's a big save the date thing in the newsletter coming out, but as you may recall, if you were here last time, our annual banquet is September 26th, which is a Thursday, September 26th, and our speaker is Bishop Strickland. And we've been keeping an eye on him just to make sure he doesn't go astray, but so far I think he's becoming more and more popular and looked to for guidance. So we're very excited about that. We also, in the newsletter, you'll find an ad contract. If anybody here is with a business or an organization that would like to get their ads in the ad book, we start doing that now. But I think it's going to be very well attended, and we're looking forward to it. We still, our regular chaplain has not been available, Father Finelli, and I'm not sure we're trying to arrange some kind of a cleric to lead us in blessing, and it just hasn't worked out yet. If anybody has anybody in mind, by the way, pass that along as well, somebody that would be able to come to these luncheons. There's only 10 of them. We don't usually do a luncheon in August, and we also don't do a luncheon the month of our annual banquet. So let me know if you know anybody like that. So without further ado, let's say a blessing and get underway. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Bless us, O Lord.
And these thy gifts which we are about to receive from thy bounty, through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you.
We're going to just get started, but it's not a problem at all. This is kind of the way the program seems to go, and we want to keep moving along. Phil Lawler is the editor of the Catholic World News, the first English language Catholic news service operating on the internet. Everybody hear this pretty good? Is that better, Mary Ann? Okay.
It's good now, thank you.
He's also the program director for the Center for the Restoration of Christian Culture at Thomas More College in New Hampshire. He was born in the Boston area and raised in the Boston area. He attended Harvard College, graduating with honors in government in 1972. Did graduate work in political philosophy at the University of Chicago before commencing a career in journalism. Mr. Lawler has served as the director of Studies for the Heritage Foundation and as president of a national organization of Catholic laity, as well as the editor of Crisis magazine. In 1986, he became the first layman to edit the Pilot, Boston Archdiocesan newspaper. And from 1993 through 2005, he was the editor of an international monthly magazine, Catholic World Report. Phil Lawler has also been active in political campaigns as a speechwriter and organizer on the local, state, and national levels. He was honorary member of the Inauguration Committee for President Ronald Reagan in 1984 and for President George Bush in 1988. In 2000, he himself was a candidate for the U.S. Senate, running against Senator Edward Kennedy, which reminded me of the quip William Buckley made when he ran for the mayor of New York and was asked what he would do if he won. He responded, "Demand a recount." I have no idea if Phil felt that way, but I'm pretty sure Bill Buckley did. Mr. Lawler is the author of 10 books on political and religious topics, including The Faithful Departed, on the decline of Catholic influence in Boston, Lost Shepherd, a candid appraisal of Pope Francis, and most recently, Smoke of Satan, how corrupt and cowardly bishops betrayed Christ, his church, and the faithful, and what can be done about it. And I believe all three of these books are still available for sale after our luncheon. Phil and his wife, Layla, the author of the best-selling Summa Domestica, have 7 children, and at last count, 20 grandchildren. The Lawlers now live in central Massachusetts, and Phil's wife, Lila, some of you may have attended, was our featured forum luncheon speaker in May of 2022. And her talk, by the way, is available on Catholic Citizens TV. Please give a warm Catholic Citizens of Illinois welcome to Mr. Phil Lawler.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you all for coming out today through the blizzard of cicadas. Kevin is right. I would have asked for a recount, except that it was pretty decisive. The truth is, I enjoyed the experience of running against Ted Kennedy. It's something I wanted to do, and I'm glad I did it. I never had any idea that I would become a U.S. Senator. Those of you who met my wife when she was here not long ago may not be surprised to know she did want to be a senator's wife, and I don't know how that would have worked out if I had won, but no matter. I'm here to talk today about Pope Francis, and a puzzlement to many of us, and I will try to be respectful and candid at the same time. Today, more or less as we speak, give or take a few hours, Pope Francis is meeting with comedians from around the world. An private audience with comedians. The Americans are included. Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon, Jim Gaffigan, Whoopi Goldberg, and Father James Martin, S.J., so now he's a comedian. I wasn't invited, although I am funny. Later today, I think, he is speaking of comedians, no, I didn't say that, President Biden, and he will be speaking to the G7 meeting, the first pope ever to address the G7. Also, just to keep you up to date, yesterday a document came out from the Vatican, a study document, not a teaching document, about the role of papal primacy. This is an interesting document. I shouldn't say that. It's a long document. Parts of it are interesting. And relevant to our topic today, because it's about the question of what is it that the Pope does? What is what's his job? And when the Pope addresses the G7 meeting, I have to admit that I shudder to think of what he's going to say and how it will play to them. I'm glad that that it's coming after his meeting with comedians because I hope at least he can warm them up with a few good jokes. When I set out to speak today, it's a little bit impertinent because who am I to talk about how the Pope is doing his job? Who am I to judge? Now, I hear a ripple, and so I know some of you recognize perhaps the most famous line of this pontificate. Who am I to judge? Delivered by Pope Francis regarding the Monsignor he had appointed to be the director of the Santa Maria residence where he lives, who had a background of homosexual activity. And he said, who am I to judge? There's an answer to that question. Who are you to judge? You're the Pope. It's one of the things popes do, is they judge, they render judgment. It is impertinent for me, I suppose, to judge the Pope, except I'm a journalist, that's my job. My job is to tell the truth as I see it, to analyze it, to try to make sense about it. If I'm wrong, so what? I've been wrong before, I'll be wrong in the future. You judge that for yourself. Who are you to judge me, I could say, I suppose. I have been, just to give you my credentials, I have been, for my sins, reading everything that comes out of the Vatican Press Office for the last 30 years. And I'm still sane, more or less. And there's a lot. And some of it is very edifying, some more than others. I do have to, I have in that time, I have won some journalistic scoops. I've also missed some stories. I'll tell you the funniest story wasn't funny at the time, is about my biggest scoop. In the conclave after Pope John Paul II died, I had a reporter in St. Peter's Square just camped out, ready to call me with, at the time it was no joke, you know, to make an international call. But he was ready to call me when there was white smoke. And he was there permanently because, you know, people don't just stand there don't stand there all the time for a couple of days, possibly. They wait for the white smoke, and then all over Rome, people rush into St. Peter's Square. Well, he was camped out there, and I got the call, white smoke. And I put online a story consisting of 2 words, white smoke. And I had the scoop. I was the first English language notice that a new pope had been elected. And it broke my site. And people were hammering on the website, you know, refresh, refresh, refresh. And the reason that the site was down was that it was getting too many requests. So it was down for about 6 hours. And by the time it came back up, everybody knew the story that Pope Benedict XVI had been elected. That was my big scoop and my big failure. I have to caution you, anyone who talks to you about what's going on in the Vatican, there's an old saying that you may have heard, that those who know don't talk and those who talk don't know. And it's for the most part true. If someone professes to be giving you the inside information about what people think at the Vatican, you should be aware that what people think might be the journalist, I'm sorry, not the journalist, the janitor in some obscure office. It might have no credibility whatsoever. So I suppose you should take that into consideration too, except that I do scrupulously check out everything that I post. And so I hope you can be reasonably confident about what I say here. Let's go right back to the beginning of this pontificate, the election of Pope Francis. And you may have heard people question whether it was a valid election. There's also the question of whether Pope Benedict's resignation was valid. It was, but I'm not going to get into that. The question here is, was Pope Francis validly elected? Because there was lobbying going on, there was politicking going on at and before the conclave. You may have heard of the Gallen Mafia, a group of liberal cardinals who got together in an effort to promote liberal causes. And one of the liberal causes they ended up promoting was the election of Cardinal Bergoglio. You may have heard that he was approached by members of this group and told not to say anything too controversial, and he answered, "We are told." He answered, "I understand." That is hearsay. That there was lobbying going on is beyond question. It was an election. Lobbying goes on before elections. Now, was this a violation of the rules of the conclave? That's for you to judge, and maybe for the confessors of these cardinals to judge. But the fact that they may have broken the rules does not render his election invalid. He has been accepted by the Universal Church as Pope. I don't know offhand of a single sitting bishop who thinks he's invalidly elected. So that part, I think, we can safely dismiss. He is the Pope. Next question, why was he elected? Well, that's a very complex question to answer if you don't want to take the time to interview all of those cardinals who selected him. But we do have the evidence of what are called the meetings, what are called the congregations of the cardinals before the conclave, where they discuss what they need to do, what the church needs. And their discussion was dominated by two problems. First, I should say, their discussion was in the wake of two extraordinary, lengthy, wonderful teaching pontificates, right? Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict. Great teachers, leaving us volumes of material that we still have plenty of time to digest. But neither very strong on governance, okay? Neither very strong on administration. And it was beginning to show. It was fast beginning to show. And there was a strong odor of corruption around the Vatican. Corruption in two areas particularly. First, in sexual abuse. Second, in finance. The overwhelming mandate of the conclave, as I saw it, was to elect someone who would address these areas of corruption, address the abuse, address the financial scandals. And Pope Francis has remarkably been given a lot of credit as a reforming pope. I say remarkable because if you look at the record, things have materially deteriorated on both of these fronts during his pontificate. First of all, it was under Pope Benedict that the reform began, both on sexual abuse and on finances. Second, it is demonstrable that Pope Francis has time and again gone out of his way to support bishops who, if not directly personally involved in sexual abuse, were at least grossly negligent in handling the issue and handling complaints about abuse. Late in his pontificate, his predecessor, Pope Benedict, had four senior cardinals do a study of corruption in the Vatican and produce a thick dossier. He chose cardinals who were retired, who had nothing to gain, nothing to lose, who were trustworthy. And they compiled a very thick dossier. I forget how many pages. I at one point was told how many pages it was. And it wasn't very long after that dossier was delivered to Pope Benedict that he resigned. I'm not saying it was because of that. I think it was a factor, but he did resign before he had time to do much about it. You may recall, shortly after Pope Francis was elected, there was a photo circulated about the first meeting between the two popes, the new pope and the Pope Emeritus. And they were in the residence where Pope Emeritus Benedict was now residing in the Vatican. And on the table in front of them was a big, thick dossier. I don't know but I suspect that's the dossier that Pope Benedict had commissioned. That was the last time I heard anything about that dossier. Whatever recommendations, they went to sleep. Now, what did happen with Pope Francis? Cardinal Daniels was chosen by the Pope to participate in the Synods on the Family after he was caught on tape advising a man who had been sexually abused by another Belgian bishop to keep quiet. In 2018, Pope Francis traveled to Chile. There he had defended Bishop Juan Barros, who had ignored abuse complaints. The Pope later would say he had never heard about those complaints. Cardinal O'Malley testified that he had hand-delivered the complaints to Pope Francis in 2015, 3 years earlier. Cardinal Errázuriz of Chile remained a member of the College of Cardinals after acknowledging a 5-year delay in investigating the charges against a notorious pedophile priest. Not only had he delayed investigating himself, he had urged Vatican officials not to hear testimony from the victims. Former Cardinal Ted McCarrick, well, I probably don't have to tell you much about McCarrick. Bishop Gustavo Zanchetta was Bishop of Nuevo Oran in Argentina, where the Pope is from, presumably knew something about it. Charges against him arose in 2015. They were kept under wraps, but in 2017 he resigned, saying it was because of his health. 7 years later, he's still apparently healthy. He was given a new job in the Vatican in the administration of the Patrimony of the Apostolic See, which is the agency that handles the Vatican's real estate in portfolio. And, by the way, is involved in the scandal of corruption. So you have someone who is involved in one scandal, you appoint him to a post, a newly created post, in another area tainted by corruption. He was in Rome, in part, so he wouldn't be in Argentina where the police were after him. Eventually, under pressure, the Vatican yielded to extradition, but allowed him to return to Rome, saying that he was needed in the job that had been created for him, from which he had been suspended. Father Marco Rupnik, famous, influential Jesuit artist, formerly Jesuit artist. You have seen his material, even if you don't know it, on posters and things that circulate in the church. I personally can't stand it, but that's de gustibus. I honestly can't tell you the accusations against him. I find them so horrible, so horrifying. Not only abuse, but blasphemous kinds of abuse with adult women religious. Because they were adults, they fall into a different category. He wasn't accused of pedophilia. But there were so many accusations against him, multiple accusations. He was excommunicated for having absolved a partner in sexual activity in the confessional. It's automatic excommunication. The excommunication was lifted in less than a month. That can't happen without support from the Pope. He was removed from the Jesuit order. He's thrown out of the Jesuit order, but he remains a priest in good standing. And when asked a few weeks ago, what is the status of the investigation into him in the Vatican official in charge said, it's advancing, it's complicated. He remains a priest in good standing. Not just that, twice in the last month, if you went on the Vatican news service on a major feast day, you saw artwork by Marco Rupnik. He's being protected. I hope you agree with me. The sex abuse scandal isn't over. The financial scandal. You may remember under Pope Benedict, things got to the point where European banking systems were questioning the validity of the Vatican Bank because of money laundering allegations, because of improper auditing, and so forth. At one point, the ATMs in Vatican City went out of business because the Italian system would not recognize them. So Pope Benedict began a laborious process. It was not his strong suit. He is not an auditor by nature. And it continued under Pope Francis, and there have been a good deal of changes to tighten down the accounting, but not enough. Last year we had the trial of the century involving a piece of real estate in London on which the Vatican lost millions in a very questionable investment involving all sorts of shell corporations and the sort of thing that you read about when there's shady dealing going on. It produced an astonishing array of consequences, including the Vatican police raiding the offices of the Secretariat of State, multiple resignations of ranking officials, and a trial that went on, and I can tell you that there isn't anybody at the Vatican who thinks the results of the trial will hold up, A, will hold up, and B, that the people ultimately responsible were the ones who were punished. Pope Francis intervened personally in the trial several times to change the rules while the trial was going on. A key official of the Secretariat of State, who looked to be right at the center of the whole transaction, was a key witness rather than one of the defendants. The defendants repeatedly said that they had authorization from the Pope to do what they wanted to do. I'll give you a hot tip that the former Auditor General of the Vatican was dismissed as part, I won't go into the whole very involved story, but he was forced to resign. He was threatened with prosecution for criminal activity because he spied on the Secretariat of State. Well, his spying consisted in trying to get from them information about the financial transactions they had made. This is what auditors do, right? They audit. They get information about financial transactions. The Secretary of State would not yield that information. This auditor has sued the Vatican, the Secretary of State, for being wrongfully dismissed. His suit in the Vatican court was rejected. He's now appealing. The appeal will be announced next week. I spent a lot of time on the phone with him recently, and he told me amazing stories about literally sacks of cash in Vatican offices. And when I say cash, he was talking about 200,000 euros. Sacks of cash in offices, specifically with regard to this transaction in London. He asked for documents, and he said the Secretary of State said, "Oh, we don't have those documents." He said, "Well, then get them. They're your documents. Get them from the banks. They're your documents referring to your property." He said, "Oh, they won't give them to us." And he said, what kind of people are you doing business with who won't give you the documents about the transaction in which you are involved? I pause here to say, I don't know how much of this is malicious and how much of it is stupidity, because my experience is that an awful lot of times people involved in a clerical life think they know more about financial affairs than they do. I know that I'm a financial rube, so I don't try complicated transactions. You know the first rule of poker? I actually don't play poker, and because I know the first rule of poker. The first rule of poker is, when you sit down at a table, you need to identify the sucker. And if after 15 minutes you haven't identified the sucker, get up. You're the sucker. I think there are a lot of suckers in the Vatican, and there are a lot of people who are anxious to do business financially with the Vatican because they see the suckers. Okay, so I'm saying that in terms of his electoral mandate, Pope Francis has not performed. So why is it that he remains popular with a lot of people? To some extent, I think it's because of an extraordinarily good press that he receives. And he receives it for a couple of reasons. The official Catholic press, diocesan newspapers and whatnot, give the Pope favorable coverage because that's their job. That's what they do. You know, they give favorable coverage to the Catholic Church and its leadership. The liberal media, and most of the media is liberal, give him favorable coverage because they generally like what he's doing. They like what he's doing politically. They like what he's doing theologically insofar as they care. And insofar as he's harming the Catholic Church, if that's what he's doing, that doesn't bother them. And the conservative Catholics tend to be polite. They tend to be respectful. I tried and tried. But these people aren't taking notice. They aren't taking notice that while Pope Francis talks about decentralization, he is more and more pulling control back to Rome and to himself. Most obvious example of that would be his handling of the Latin Mass. It's not enough for bishops to decide in their own diocese, knowing the situation, whether or not it's a problem. He talks about being collegial, but his personal style is extremely authoritarian. He has been known to summon Vatican officials off the altar as they are saying Mass. He has been known to fire officials summarily. You're gone the next day. Now he is coming to what looks to be seen as the culmination of his pontificate with the Synod on Synodality. And the idea of synodality, insofar as you can grasp the idea, which is a very diffuse idea, is to have all of the world's bishops, or I think in his idea, all of the world's people, discuss what the church should do. But the synod is going to be packed. It's the people who are chosen to participate in the synod, the people who are chosen to run the synod, the preparatory document is all controlled by the Vatican. And what's more, Pope Francis has taken certain issues off the table. For instance, the question that was arising about a year ago at the preliminary synod meeting last October was whether women could be ordained as deacons. Now, like it or not, that was an idea on everybody's minds. You could discuss it at this meeting of the synod. Pope Francis decided, no, that's not going to be discussed at this. Just by the way, what does a synod mean? You know, the Eastern churches in communion with Rome have their synods of bishops. And those synods choose bishops. Those synods make liturgical rules for the different rites. That's synodality. Notice that it's the bishops who are doing it. And it's the bishops who are joining in governance. It's not a question of involving everyone, whether or not they are loyal to the church, whether or not they're even Catholics, asking them what they think the church should do to improve. It's a question of bishops who have a charism as successors of the apostles to do this. But in a sense, everything that I've said thus far is preliminary to the most serious question, which is, what is the role of the Pope? And I think people who are not Catholic have an exaggerated idea of the Pope's proper authority, that the Pope can make up the rules. In fact, the Pope has less freedom to make rules than any of us, because his job is to preserve and defend the faith that comes to us from the apostles, to preserve it intact and defend it intact. How has he done on that? My book, The Lost Shepherd, I try to make an extended argument, more extended than I will be. I am going to wrap this up today. That he has a habit and I think it's quite intentional, of raising questions about articles of faith, not contradicting them, but raising enough questions about them to be confusing. Now again, some of my friends will go further. Some will say he has engaged in heresy. I don't think that's a defensible position. First, because heresy is a defined crime, right? And you have to have evidence to support what is it he did and does it fit the definition? Is it persistent denial, persistent public denial of defined doctrine? And I do not find, and I've looked, I do not find anywhere where Pope Francis clearly contradicts Catholic doctrine, established Catholic doctrine. Even if I did, by the way, it would be one of those who am I to judge things, because if I say that looks like a real contradiction, I'm not the ultimate authority. Who is? The Pope. So we're back to square one. However, I do think that there are multiple times when he has tiptoed right up to the line on a question of Catholic doctrine, and then sort of smiled at the people on the other side of that line, patted them on the back, raising confusion. For instance, in Amoris Laetitia, he does not say that Catholics who are divorced and remarried without benefit of annulment can receive the Eucharist. He doesn't say that, but he almost says that. It's in a footnote. It's sort of deniable. The people who do say it, he said they agree, they are properly interpreting what I said, but he didn't quite say it himself. And more recently, in the statement that the instruction that he approved, although he didn't write Fiducia Supplicans, he does not say that priests can give a blessing to homosexual couples. In fact, he's very insistent. They're not blessing the union, they're blessing the two people in the union. That's what he says, and yet what is the message that people are getting? In his interviews, when he questioned the existence of hell or the afterlife, in his interviews with atheists, in his offhand remarks on airplanes, he's repeatedly said things that make you at least scratch your head, maybe lose your hair. You look at what's happened. And then the Vatican Press Office issues a clarification, and the clarification still leaves you wondering, did he really say that? Is that what he really meant? Just by the way, this past week, the Vatican Press Office announced that it would no longer be issuing a transcript of his spontaneous remarks. I think it's obvious why not, because they're problematical. The net effect of all these is to suggest the doctrine really doesn't matter, right? That we can disagree on doctrine. That's not important. What's important is, well, what is important? Because Pope Francis has also been speaking with remarkable clarity about some issues that are outside of his natural authority. He denies the existence of just war. Just war has been the justice of warfare, and for that matter of the death penalty in extreme cases, has been defended by Catholic bishops, priests, and theologians for centuries. He's more dogmatic about climate change than he is about marriage. In climate change particularly, I wrote a little while ago, the Pope has issued statements saying that anyone who denies the seriousness of man-made climate change is foolish. When he made that statement, he assumed that the recent trend toward higher temperatures is going to continue and accelerate with disastrous consequences. He assumed that the warming of the Earth is due to the rapid accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. He assumed that the accumulation is caused by human activity, specifically the consumption of fossil fuels. All three of those assumptions are contested by first-rate scientists. Now, the Pope is not a scientist, and he's not an authority on science. Why is he dogmatic about this and not dogmatic about other things? Throughout, I've been talking now mostly about his public image, and I do think we are coming to a critical point. We're coming to the twilight of this pontificate. partly because he's old, his health is poor, partly because the level of corruption, which I mentioned before, is becoming unmistakable with the Rupnik scandal, with the Milone scandal in the finances. Damian Thompson of the Daily Telegraph in London recently wrote, "Perhaps it was naive of the cardinals in 2013 to expect the former Cardinal Bergoglio to clean up the corruption that had driven Benedict XVI to the state of helpless despair in which he resigned his office. But that was the main reason they elected him. He promised pest control, and it was a promise he didn't keep." Then there's one other reason why he may be in trouble, Pope Francis may be in trouble. He has recently done something that endangers his status as a favorite of the liberal media. No doubt you saw what he said when he said that seminaries should be careful because they don't want too much, this is the term he used, faggotry. That's the only good translation I've heard of the slang Italian word he used. And he repeated it. He said it again. After the Vatican press office issued an apology, he said it again a few days later. He meant it. Now, what did he mean? Because after he said that, he spoke with a young man who had applied to the seminary and was denied because of homosexual tendencies, and he encouraged him to continue pursuing the priesthood. Just yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, he met for an hour with Father James Martin, who is always and everywhere supporting the homosexual cause, and encouraged him in his work. I think when he says he doesn't want faggotry in the seminaries, what he means he doesn't want flamboyant homosexuals because they make it more difficult for the ones who are a bit more discreet about their activities. That's my reading, but in any case, he did say that, he did use that term, that homophobic term, and the media won't easily forget about them. Just one more thing, and this is not a problem for the media, but it is certainly a problem for me. Did you know that Pope Francis has not celebrated Mass publicly for 2 years? I find that stunning. I find that astonishing. He presides at Mass. You read he's presiding at the Eucharist on Sundays or on holy days, which means he sits on the side wearing a coat. He delivers a homily, but he does not confect the Eucharist himself. Why not? Because of his health? We know his health is poor. He's in a wheelchair. Earlier this year, he had severe breathing difficulties, and he had other people delivering his speech, but he seems to have recovered. Let's face it, the physical demands of celebrating Mass are not great. Why doesn't he do it? Remember Pope John Paul II celebrating Mass when he could barely move and barely croak out the words because he thought it was important, and it is important. Because a pope, as bishop, as any priest, as any of us, is priest, prophet, and king, right? Priest first. Priest comes first. If the Eucharist isn't the most important thing, what is? So when Pope Francis travels in September, as he plans to Oceania, and he visits Papua New Guinea and Indonesia and all these other countries, I assume that he will preside at Mass and he will deliver the homily. What would you say, what would you think if you were there seeing this, observing this? Wouldn't you think that the message from him is that the homily is really, really important? That what he says is really, really important, more important than what he does? To me, that's the most disturbing message of this pontificate. But there are many disturbing messages, and there's an awful lot for the next pope to repair. So let me look, in conclusion, to the future. This October we'll have the finale, or the grand conclave of the Synod on Synodality. I think you should expect fireworks. I think you should expect major controversies. I think that prelates of the church are ready to fight. They also have less exalted reasons. They're ready to maneuver because there is a conclave in the future. And they're ready to take a stand for themselves or for others. I think it will be a fiery conclave. A fiery synod. And then sometime not too distant future, just actuarial charts being what they are, we will have a conclave. People think that Pope Francis has packed the College of Cardinals. I'm not so sure. For one reason, I know that some cardinals who voted for him in 2013 have buyer's remorse. I know that there is a blocking third in the College of Cardinals. There will not be another Pope Francis, at least. If there is, it will be a surprise to those who elect him. I don't know what's going to happen. I think it will be fascinating. I think that it will be a time toward which our prayers should be oriented ferociously right now. And I think it's a time when we as lay Catholics need to encourage our bishops, our cardinals, our priests, and encourage them to encourage the cardinals to speak out in defense of the faith, because it's high time that the faith has the defense that it needs. That's my quick summary. I do want to just say, if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I know some of you probably need to leave. I also have books for sale. All those books, $10 a pop. You can't beat the price. The book Contagious Faith is about the COVID lockdown and the role of the church in the COVID lockdown. You mentioned Bishop Strickland. Bishop Strickland recently said he was looking forward to the publication of this book. He said that and posted that online, and I was delighted that he was looking forward to it, but it has been out for a couple of years. And so I need to sell it. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, as always, we'll do some Q&A. I'm not aware of anybody who has to leave, so. But anyway, any questions? Yeah, Jim.
I was wondering, you mentioned conservative Catholics or Orthodox Catholics that are too polite about this Pope. What are your views on them? Are they, they more objective? Are they kind of being complicit in promoting bad decisions?
Well, I mean, I was one of them, and my default position is to support the Pope. And I don't think, when you talk about conservative Catholics, I think as time goes by, things become more obvious. And I think that's a natural progression. I guess I was early on. The Lost Shepherd came out several years ago, and that was early on. But I think by now, the people who are likely to speak out have been speaking out. I don't see that as too much of a problem.
I would just interpose a question myself. I also long had the impression that the office of the Pope is incompatible with a great administrator. It's almost just too much to expect one person to do both. And so I've always wondered who, and I don't want to sound like conspiratorial, but who actually is kind of running things behind the scenes, if you have some idea. And how do you deal with that problem? Because again, I just don't see how a Pope can both be a spiritual leader and a good administrator.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that gets to the question of what is the Pope's job, and I think that's a question that this pontificate is bringing to the fore. Because honestly, I think that most of us have come to think that the Pope should solve all our problems, and that's not really his job. The job of the Pope is the first among equals and is a focus of unity of the bishops. It's the job of the individual bishops to run their individual dioceses, and we've looked to Vatican to do too much.
As for who's running things at the Vatican, generally speaking, the Secretariat of State is where it's at. And that's not a conspiracy theory, that's demonstrable, that's on record. And I'm on record as saying I think that's a bad idea, because the Secretary of State of the Vatican is not just like our Department of State. It's also sort of like, the Secretary of State is like the Chief of Staff, or almost like the Prime Minister. And as such, he is dealing, and the Secretary of State is dealing with other governments. So there's a natural political influence in the Secretary of State. And that's okay. I just don't think that that should be the dominant influence in Vatican decision-making. You know, the ideas of the political ideas, they're a factor, but they shouldn't be the factor. I'll also say, we were discussing at dinner last night, some of us, why did Pope Benedict resign? And I think one of the reasons he resigned, and I think there were many, but I think one was that he knew he was failing physically, and he had seen what happened with John Paul II as he was less and less capable of keeping all of the administrative strings tied up. And he didn't want it to happen again.
Yes, sir.
My question is, I guess I gotta pick one out of 200. Where the flock, where the sheep out in the pasture, and the Pope is the shepherd, is the vicar of Christ. And what I see, I'm a convert to the Catholic Church, and I was so excited that I didn't have to make up my own rules anymore as an atheist. Took a lot of weight off my shoulders. But now the weight's coming back on my shoulders because I hear comments saying we have to be open to everyone, and then saying dogmatists and traditionalists are a danger to everyone. And I said, okay, how is that welcoming? And most of all, though, everybody out there, it's like a Rorschach test. Everybody is hearing what they want to hear, and actually bishops and even pastors are carrying it along according to their politics and their theology. So here we are, the sheep, and we're kind of running around saying, okay, what do we believe today? So is the Pope aware, to your knowledge, of the fact that people are wandering around saying, okay, it's okay to be a homosexual, it's okay to be liberal, it's okay to be pro-abortion, no, it's okay for this, no, it's not okay for that. And so that's my basic question. Does the Pope understand the level of confusion and dissension that his papacy has created?
He can't fail to understand that many, many people are confused and discouraged. He can't fail to understand that. I personally believe that it's more or less intentional. Not that he intends to discourage, but that he does intend to confuse, because he wants us all to think for ourselves and to make our own decisions and to put that weight on your shoulders. And that is contrary to his job, because his job is to help you understand what is expected of you in the Catholic faith, what is determined for you. You have enough questions to answer in your own life about applying those rules to your particular situation. That's your problem. But at least to have clarity about what the rules are is, as you say, it's a great blessing of Catholicism.
I also would suggest one solution, and this is the way I personally deal with some of the more difficult things coming out from the Pope. He's only the most recent Pope. We've had hundreds of them, and the further back you go to the Church Fathers, in my view, the more clear the rules are, and those, as Phil said, his role is to preserve the faith, not to revise it and keep reforming it and so forth. So go back and take comfort from Benedict, John Paul II. Go back to the earliest Church Fathers and remind yourself what the faith really is at core, because it's not it's not environmentalism, it's not this other stuff. And you can't just, if you can write off, if the current Pope controls all of this, then what were all those other popes doing all this time? So anyway, I think there's a lot of richness in our past popes, and that's what I find very helpful. Any other questions?
I have a question
Yeah, who said that?
over here.
Oh, okay.
I wondered what has happened to Cardinal Burke since he took his stipend away from him, and also, is he still canceling priests and bishops who might be conservative?
Well, at the Vatican, where he has control, there is not a whole lot of freedom of speech. Vatican officials are keenly aware that they could be out on their ears at any moment. Now, individual bishops in individual dioceses, that's a matter for the bishops. Cardinal Burke, to be honest with you, I think he's very happy to be out of Rome. And it's not that he's impoverished, it's not that he's homeless, it's that he didn't have the stipend to live in the apartment that he should have been able to live in. I think he's happy where he is. I think he's very effective. The only problem is Rome is where cardinals meet, and Cardinal Burke probably wouldn't like this, but I wish he were there to have lunch with his fellow cardinals frequently, which he was doing, and being a sort of center for organizing. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for your speech. Thank you. Sort of building on this person behind me, I can't see, who was talking about the sheep. What do you do when you're in the Archdiocese of Chicago and you have a Colonel Supage? And, I'm asking that question, and I live in parishes that are very, very liberal. And, what are my choices? Do I leave for a conservative parish? And one of the books Pope Benedict wrote was about how in the Old Testament and then into the New Testament, the people of God, the prophets especially, would stand in that void or in that breach between the people and God and be an intercessor. And I just wonder, like, in everybody's journey, are they feeling laid upon their heart to stay and to fight for the orthodoxy and for this positive faith, as you mentioned, and or lament and run away? I mean, it's an important question for your own self to ask.
It's a very, very important question, and a difficult one. On the one hand, I don't like the idea, okay, let me ask you your first question first. How should you behave in the Archdiocese of Chicago? Keep your head down and pray for better days. But in terms of past parishes, I have frequently told people, you just have to get out of that parish. It's painful, especially if you have a history in the parish. It's where you grew up, where you were married, so forth, where your parents were buried. It's painful, but you have to get some support somewhere. You just have. You can't do it by yourself. And there are so many great supportive communities popping up all around. And Catholics are clustering. This is something that I see more and more in my job, that groups like this, a lot of young Catholic families getting together, forming little clusters, growing, having fun. It's attractive. They draw people to themselves. They're active. They're the future. Demographics is going to solve the problem in the long run. In the short run, it's a tough call because, as I say, you have to get some sustenance. You don't want to abandon the parish. You want to be active in the parish. You want to save it if it can. On the other hand, if you have children, you have to be mindful of what are they getting out of it. It's a tough call.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was Dr. Kwasniewski or one of our earlier speakers, but it was essentially the same advice up to a point. If you're not able to affect any change in your parish, you got to find another parish, and it's very hard. It's very hard. You shouldn't get pushed out of your own parish, but the question is when, when do you reach that tipping point where you just can't, nothing's gonna change, or maybe it's gonna get worse, and in the meantime, you got your life to live and you got your kids' lives to live and so forth. So we'll take a couple more and then we're gonna break. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my question is, we're responsible, if we understand that these, we're concerned about what decisions the Pope is making, what's going on in the church. If we would consider writing to the cardinals on an individual basis and expressing our concerns in a charitable way, and prayerfully say, we're praying for them, encouraging them, but that we have these concerns about what's going on. I don't know that it would make a difference, but if enough people did it, with the next conclave on the horizon somewhere, it might make a difference. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. But I'd say also, you do it in the way you do politics. You concentrate on the people who you think you can reach. You do it in a way that you hope is winsome, that won't offend them. But if you are if you're trying to change people, what you're trying to do, you usually, it's unrealistic to expect a dramatic change, right? It is realistic to expect somebody who's doing something will do a little something more. So you find somebody who's basically sympathetic and say, would you take this leadership position? You take someone who's in the fence, would you consider this? I think that's tremendously effective. I don't think enough people do it. This lady's been waiting.
I had read in one of my Catholic magazines that before he went to Rome, when he was just an Argentinian priest or bishop, his superior had put into his file, he should not be promoted. And when this file went to the Vatican or something, that was erased.
Oh, it's there. Yeah, that's a fact. There are interesting mysteries in his background. He's a Jesuit. He was not liked by the Jesuits. He was a Jesuit provincial in Argentina. He was extremely unpopular as a provincial. He was sent out to the sticks. And at that point, his superior said he should not be considered for higher office.
He was also considered very conservative, is that right?
He was considered conservative. He did not associate with Jesuits on the rare occasions when he went to Rome to visit. And the Jesuits were not happy at first when he was elected. Fact, this is a fact, you can take it to the bank. There's talk about the St. Gallen Mafia wanting him to be elected instead of Benedict. And there's talk about the Cardinal Martini, who was sort of the ringleader of the St. Gallen Mafia, who was a Jesuit, that he wanted Bergoglio. False. After that election, Cardinal Martini said, and I quote exactly, better Ratzinger than Bergoglio. So there was something there. And then when he was elected Pope, suddenly he was very friendly with the Jesuits, and the Jesuits were very friendly with him. That's a mystery to me.
I think we're going to wrap it up. Probably, if you have more questions, you can talk to Phil over by the bookstall.
Set up my stand.
Now, I'm just going to bring up Madame Mascarelli for a moment to talk about our upcoming speaker schedule.
Good afternoon. I won't keep you but another minute or two, but it's very nice to see you here, and we on the board at Catholic Citizens are grateful to you for coming, and we're grateful as well to our speaker, Phil Lawler, for sharing his insights with us. We were fortunate to welcome his wife, Layla, a couple of years ago, and after having talked to the two of them, I cannot help but to think how nice it would be to have dinner at the Lawler family, and how different it would be from what it would be like to have dinner at the table of Kellyanne and George Conway. As Kevin mentioned, we have a number of esteemed speakers lined up already for the balance of this year and for 2025 already. Next month, we've got the journalist Jeremiah Bannister. Bishop Strickland will be here for our annual dinner. In October, we've just booked Adam Andrzejewski. He's the founder and CEO of OpenTheBooks.com. And he's going to be, On the abortion issue and a lot of the other moral issues, we all know what's at stake in November's election. But he's going to, in the face of all the obfuscation and the political spin, he's going to give us the cold, hard facts on a number of issues that will be of great moment in the election, including immigration numbers, gotaways, number of unaccompanied minors, funding of the Palestinians, a lot of the funding of Middle East countries that we don't know about, and the public funding of so many of these liberal universities. So it'll be very interesting for us to have the cold hard facts that he really specializes in. His group is the largest private database for public sector funding, so he'll have a lot of great information to share with us. In November, the writer Francis X. Meyer is going to be speaking to us. He is a longtime advisor and speechwriter for Archbishop Chaput, and he's done a number of interviews with American bishops, and he's going to be speaking about the reasons to be concerned and the reasons to be optimistic for the future of the church, based upon those interviews. Father Joshua Caswell, that we all know, will be speaking in December in anticipation of Christmas about the monumental nativity scene, the Presepio, at St. John Cantus. It's kind of an expression of the incarnation into a world of saints and sinners. And then in 2025, Dr. Teresa Farnan will be speaking to us about the perils of transgenderism. We're committed to booking worthy speakers who have something powerful and unique to contribute to the mission of the Catholic Church in the world today. The speakers we invite are prominent and they're highly sought after spokesmen for the truth of the faith. More importantly, they are co-workers in the vineyard of the Lord, and as we know, the worker is worth his wage. In addition to that, all our other costs, from the luncheons to postage to the number of expenses it costs for us to bring in these speakers, are increasing significantly, especially in the past few years. As a result, it is my unhappy but necessary duty to ask you to seriously consider whether what we offer merits your increased financial support. We are very aware that in this day of YouTube and just scores of really good Catholic podcasts, you can get a lot of the information on Orthodox Catholic issues at no cost. But we try to offer something more on a monthly basis here. We have a chance to engage personally with our speakers, a chance to dress up a little bit, to have lunch together in an elegant setting with like-minded Catholics, and Catholics who are similarly committed to the faith. We as Catholics are keenly aware of the justice of giving others their due, and those of us who consider ourselves conservatives never expect to get something for nothing. So if you believe that our mission is of value, we on the board ask you earnestly, first, to be sure that you are up to date with your membership dues, and that covers our monthly newsletter, and secondly, to consider making as generous a donation to our efforts as you are able. Phil Lawler did not mention that he has an avocation as a beekeeper. These marvelous creatures, mentioned not once but twice in the Easter Exultet, have long been a model for the Church of the light and sweetness of the gospel, and they're exemplars of the virtue of working together to accomplish great things. That's really what we try to do here at Catholic Citizens of Illinois. So if you are in a position to be more generous, even magnanimous, for example, sponsoring a speaker, or sponsoring one of our events, we would really love to talk to you. And then another little request. Our luncheons are always on the second Friday of the month. Once you've checked your calendar and know that you can join us for luncheon, if you could please respond and buy your tickets, either call and let us know you'll be coming, or go on TicketSpice and buy your tickets just as soon in the month as possible. That'd be a great kindness to us and to the staff here at the Carlisle, because it makes it a lot more difficult for them if we have to add a lot of people. We are always happy to have a lot of people, but it makes it more difficult if it's a last minute thing. So once again, we're very happy to have you here, and we're looking forward to seeing you next month and in the upcoming luncheons next year in 2025.
Thank you all again for coming, and that kind of concludes our program. I will just mention once again our website. I don't think there was a single episode or story or history that Phil mentioned that we had not covered on the website. And we don't have reporters. A lot of our information comes from other publications like Phil's. But it's extremely helpful to understand and know about these controversies in the church. You might hear a little piece about it, and you just have to understand what's going on and not get totally depressed or cut yourself off from what's going on. Because people are going to confront you about it. And when you talk about supporting your good priests or your good bishops or whatever, you got to know what you're talking about. So I again recommend our site to you. You can go as frequently as you like. It's updated pretty much every day. And also make sure you're getting our weekly newsletter, which goes out. It doesn't have all the articles, but it has most of them. Goes out at the end of the week. So again, thank you for coming. Look forward to seeing you again very soon, and have a nice weekend. Thank you.